As so he says that's an example. Like an example, Benishmas Adam, a soul of a person. Shekaidim by Leguf, before the soul comes down to the body, is Haisa Betela Betachlis. It was totally nullified to Hashem. It was a soul that had no wants other than to be connected to Hashem. Like Abi Arin Saif Baruch to the infinite light. As it says in the verse about Elijah the prophet, Chai, I swear to Hashem, Asher Ma'ati Lefanov, I stood before him, meaning the soul. He's talking about the soul of a person stands before God in a level of self-nullification before it comes down to this world. And why does it have this absolute connection and nullification to God? Because there was nothing to darken the relationship, master and to conceal. Aleha. Hagila likus, it's revelation to godliness. So it sees its source, and it's obvious that its source is godliness. And that obvious awareness brings it to a focus and a nullification to Hashem. And because of that, it's not an avoda. It's not you have the soul when it's in heaven has to work on itself to nullify itself to God. There's no concealment. There's no darkness. If it's no darkness, it sees the reality of godliness for what it is, and therefore it's obviously nullified to Hashem. That's the way the soul is in the higher spheres before it connects to a body. But once the soul comes down and enters into a physical material body, as I haguf, the body itself is master aleha, conceals, and so to say, and creates a feeling of separation. The isnidba, to give the impression of a oilam umlayai, that the world to be something separate and an existence on its own. So it's only the soul as it's in the body and through the eyes of the body, because the life force of the body is still the soul. But when it's enclosed in the body, it sees the world in an imaginary a reality that can be separate from God, and the world is an obvious, and God is a chiddush. God is something that it has to find. And it doesn't see anymore. How the world itself is nullified, doesn't really exist. The Gabi Or in Saif Baruch to the infinite light, that gives life and vitality. The world itself, the world itself is constantly bowing towards God. Why is the world bowing towards God? Because the creation itself does see its existence from Hashem. It's only the soul in the body sees its existence and its existence in the world in the idea that it should be separate from God. So what's interesting is the world itself knows that it's connected to God. The world has no illusion. The sun is always bowing towards God. It's us in our body, the way we look at the sun and the way we look at the world and we look at the reality and people around us and the happenings around us and the ups and downs in our life as if it's godless. We don't see godliness. We don't see that everything's absolute godliness, but the creation itself does see it. And that's the idea of the breaking of the vessels. Breaking of the vessels is when there's no longer a direct, obvious connection to its source. Shenaflu hanetzutz is the sparks of these vessels of the world of Tohu, because there was the makeup of the vessels in the world of chaos weren't able to handle the light. So there's a light that goes in the vessels. It breaks, and when it breaks, it separates. And it fell into the world, it became swallowed up in the physicality of the world, and it gives life to worldly things, but it doesn't have the feeling that it's connected to God. And not only that, vice versa, it gives life to things that are opposite to God. That's the whole idea that we have to break Mitzrayim, break Pharaoh. So that's the idea of the breaking of the vessels. To tell you that the sparks of the world of chaos break and fall into and they get swallowed up into, so to say, the sources of separation in the worlds of creation. And these klipos, the klipos actually, the word klipa means a peel. Just like a peel of a fruit covers the fruit, so too there's a peel in creation, a klipa in creation, that's an existence that could swallow up a source of energy of godliness and cover its connection to its source. Like a peel separates the fruit from the outside. The peels separate, so to say, darken the sparks. So umastir ma'isa mikol tzad, and like a peel that covers from all sides, it doesn't have any opening. That shouldn't feel the feeling of the infinite light. And then it becomes an existence on its own in its mind, so to say. Like Pharaoh says, and Pharaoh is a perfect example of an existence of something that has life, because Pharaoh has life. Not only that, he has life, he has a lot of power, because he has heavy sparks in him. But it's swallowed up within him, and therefore it's an energy without it knowing its source. And therefore, Pharaoh says, "Li oirvani asisini." I give off light myself, and I'm my own source. I created myself. Rak dekarle lekade lekaya means he's not totally void of the idea of godliness. He knows that there is a concept of God, but the connection to him and God is something that he's not accepting. He says God created the world and gave a source of energy, but once that energy is in the world, I'm my own person. Right? It's not so different than what people think today. People say, yes, I was born, I was created, but now I'm my own person. I have my own needs, my own feelings, my own wants. So he goes, and just like the soul is nullified to godliness before it comes down to the body, so too the sparks are nullified before, but that's before. At that point, there was nothing concealing it. But after the breaking, that the sparks fell into these peel-like substances that concealed and doesn't allow for its awareness of its source. It encloses and conceals from them the revelations of godliness, just like the body, just like the soul and the body is relationship, that the soul before it comes down to the body doesn't need to be told about God. That's I stood before you constantly because it recognizes its source. It's only when it comes down to this world that it gets into the body gets, even though it's the soul seeing and the soul tasting and the soul feeling and the soul needing, right? It's the soul needing this, all the needs and the what's going on in your mind and relationships and happenings and dealings is all the soul alive, but it's the soul alive the way it's within the body. When it's in the body, it doesn't see its source, it feels itself as a separate existence. And because of that, so therefore there doesn't have the self-nullification because godliness is not obvious to it. You have to understand a few things. See, the difference between the sparks and the soul is the soul was placed in this world. God said you have to go down to this world, and in this concealment, you're on a mission. And your mission is to find these sparks and to elevate them. And the only way to engage in the sparks is not from above, you have to be within. And within means you also have to be separate from its source. It means the sparks themselves had their own problem. It wasn't a mission. When something breaks, it's not a mission. It means you can say in the bigger picture, there was an idea there, but the way it played out, there was obviously something wrong in its form before the breaking that led to the breaking, right? Otherwise, it wouldn't have broken. And what was wrong was its inability to coexist, and therefore was very much pushing a certain agenda, even if it was a godly agenda. But it had some sort of tilt towards it that caused that there should be a situation of a breaking. And the soul doesn't have that. It wasn't broken. The soul doesn't fall down to this world. The soul comes down to this world. God sends the soul down to this world, but to be in a similar environment, like the sparks are captured within existences of impurity. The soul goes down into an existence of a body that doesn't have obvious godliness, and at that reality, it has to meet the spark. And that challenge that the soul has with the body, it has to at the same time simultaneously work on itself in its own struggle. And by working on itself in its own struggle, it'll have the ability to find those sparks and take them out. That's why we are where we are, each person in their place in the world. Because there's the body itself, the person in the body could be anywhere in the world. But if there's an avoda for you to be in that specific place, that's the sparks that you have to engage in your 70, 80, 120 years that you're in this world. But in order to have a connection to that spark, you yourself have to be in a situation of darkness. So that's the idea of the body and the soul. That's the idea of the exile. So why is it called a klipa, like a peel? Just like a peel covers the fruit, that's within the peel, and conceals the fruit from the outside world. For instance, and there's different types of peels. There's thin peels, like an apple peel, an orange peel, and then there's the peel of a nut, right? A walnut, that's a much thicker peel. Like the peel of a nut. The only way to get to the fruit is to break the klipa. This is the outside protection. So in the case of a walnut, you have to totally crack the walnut in order to get to the fruit, which is the nut. So just like you have to break the peel to get to the fruit, so too, in order to get to the spark, you have to break the klipa. The klipa is a force that's protecting its existence. It wants to exist to siphon off the energy of the spark and to conceal it and separate it from its source. So how do we release the spark? You have to break the shell. You have to break the klipas. That's the whole point of why there had to be the miracles and wonders and the plagues in Egypt. The idea wasn't just to punish Egypt. The idea more than that was to break the klipa, break that reality, look at, it's not hard to understand what we're talking about. Even imagine you had a Moshe Rabbeinu showed up today and said the message that Moshe said then. It would have to break a mindset. And that breaking the mindset doesn't come easy. It's not just, okay, fine, Moshe's here, go serve God. He's introducing a totally new reality to the world. And that new reality takes a process, and the process is you have to break the klipa and release the sparks, the source of godliness. He explains, it says that the river left the place of Eden, which then it was a single source of water. Only after leaving Eden does it separate, and it becomes 4 different rivers. And one of the rivers is called Pishon. So this is in the beginning of Bereshis, when the world was created. So it says that God created the world with a single source of water, and from there came the 4 main rivers in the Middle East. So it says Pirish, Hanar Yaitse, the Euphrates River, the Nile, etc. Pirish Hanar Yaitse Mi'eden, Ki Hamshacha v'Ara Hanimshachas Mechach Mi'la Datzila. So what does this mean spiritually? So the single source of water is the flow of life that comes from God's chachma, wisdom. In the world of Atzilus, in the world of Amination, where everything is absolute godliness, the wisdom of God is obvious, connected to its source. And in there is enclosed the infinite of God, the infinite light. And this flow of the river from the chachma comes the life force in the world of Atzilus. What does it mean throughout the world of Atzilus? Because in the world of Atzilus, we have the intellectual and the emotional. The worlds themselves, the spheros, the person's makeup is so to say a mimic of this breakup of the spheros. A person has 10 koiches, 10 strengths, right? We have the three intellectual components within ourselves, and the 7 emotions, the 6 emotions, and there's the 7th, which is malchus. And that's the way God created the world. And the worlds themselves have those midas. When God created the world on the first day, He created through the attribute of kindness. The second day, when they separated the waters, that's boundaries. That's the midah, the attribute of gvura. So but the life force of these midas, that there's a force of chesed, there's a force of gvura, there's a force of tiferes which coexists, and also the coexistence creates a beauty. The force of netzach, to be determined, the force of acknowledgement, connection. So these are all forces of godliness. These are the 10 spheros that have a life force. And where do they draw the life force from? From the main river, which is Chachma, that comes from Eden, that comes from the source. So the infinite light comes from a simplicity. And God made that the simplicity should be defined and manifest into the different midas, the different attributes. So he says, it's the light that comes from Atzilus, from the Chacham, the wisdom of Atzilus. We're there in the wisdom, It has the breakup of all the components of the 10 attributes. And from that river flows, from the Chachma understands, the wisdom understands how you're supposed to be kind. What does it mean to be kind? What's the argument to be kind? What's the argument for boundaries? And it goes all the way down to the garden. The garden is the receptacle, which is Malchus. So there's Malchus is the end game. Like in a person, Malchus is speech, is communication. What does a person communicate? Hopefully who the person is, what you're thinking, what you're feeling. If you're a kind person, then you're giving off, you're projecting kindness. If you're a strict person, a judgmental person, you're projecting judgment. So these are the different attributes that come out through communication. It's so too in God. Malchus is the way God brings the attributes into the world to give these different components within the world. This is the water goes through the process to garden, so to say, the garden. In the world of Atzilus, these are expressions of godliness but again, it's in a way that's absolutely connected to godliness. This is the chesed, the kindness of God. It's a pure chesed. Today, in our world, the way things are in our life is a reflection of the way things are in our world. Is our chesed, our kindness, it's very hard to be emes, true, because we have an agenda. I'm kind. I want something in return. That something in return could be many different things. It doesn't have to be just acknowledgement. It could be also to feel good about yourself, that you're able to be a giving person. But that's to have absolute pure goodness on its own. That's higher in the world of Atzilus, where it's God in manifesting in the concept of goodness. Therefore, its source, it's one single river. Because it's a world of unification. There's no separate agenda. It's just a manifestation. It's an expression of the simplicity of God in a manner of chesed, of kindness, or in a manner of judgment. But when it comes to the world of creation, here things start separating. So when they start separating, they start going to four different major groups, which are the four rivers that go out of the original river from Eden. And so he continues. He says, "Azai mishami part from the when it enters out of the world of Atzilus, it starts to separate. Then it becomes four rivers. The beginning of separation. The beginning of separation is in four. That's why there's four parts of the chariot of the vision of Yecheskel. And that's why even the Jewish people, with their camping around the tabernacle, was in four different flags. That's the system of the separation. The four divided by three is the 12 sons of Aaron. The 12 gates, the 12 and 13th gates of the entrance of the temple. And Kimshal Hanar is just like a river. Just like rivers are not duplicates of each other. I believe there's a river by the Amazon. When the waters meet, you could see as they're meeting that this is a darker water, this is a clearer water. You can see they're not the same river, not the same source. So too, you have once they separate, they're no longer the one source. They find their own identity. So they're not similar one to the next. Not in their character, means their essence. One could be a sweet water, tzlulin, or a clear water. The other one won't be clear, won't be sweet. It's also not in size. So not in content, the water itself is not the same. And the size, the way the river runs is not the same. One could go further distance, 200 parses, which is a distance, and one could maybe go only 100 parses, etc. Just like the rivers are not dissimilar, so too the river of the flow of godliness are not the same. So the river Pishon is the Nile, is the Nilus, and therefore the Sar Shemitzrayim, that's where the angel that represents Egypt. So just like the waters are not the same, so the waters represent the sources of life in a different style. Different rivers have different styles. And in the Nile fell a majority of the sparks. So the sparks had to fall somewhere. So where did they fall? That's why Egypt had a majority of the sparks of the broken vessels fell into the Egyptian society and was there up until Joseph started the process of refining them and taking them out, and would have to get deeper with the 210 years of the exile. And he says there's much more sparks that fell in Egypt in the river of the Nile than what fell in the Euphrates by Babylonia. He says, V'ata now, Yuvin Amoifsim, Shehera Hashem Yisparach Mitzrayim. So now we understand the miracles. Miracles are not just what's ever the point of a miracle. The point of a miracle is an expression of godliness, where a person gets caught up in the routine. That the routine is the sun is going to rise at a certain point, right? Everyone could check their phones and know exactly. The Zmanim is by definition a Zman, a time, is the routine. That's the nature. You know, a person can know in advance for the next who knows how long, through the calendars and this and the different Zmanim, where you are in the world, what time the sun rises, what time you can start davening Shachris, what time can you start davening Ma'ariv, what time is Mincha, what time Shabbos starts, what time Yom Tov starts. Everything's Zman, everything has its limitations. Everything goes into routine. So a person is like Shabbos says Makacha v'Kaima. Shabbos continues. It's just 7 days. It's after 6 days is going to come the Shabbos. What's a miracle? Breaking that routine. And what is it supposed to awaken within the person who's watching and experiencing the miracle? Is a sign that the world doesn't exist the way it means you think that the world has a system. And it's really the system is constantly being given life by God. It means a miracle is not that God's breaking the system. God's showing you that the system that exists is His system, and it's by choice. It's not. We shouldn't take for granted the happenings of the world. And sometimes the miracle is to take a person out of a situation. Sometimes the miracle is to save the person. Sometimes the miracle is to show the person. So a miracle has a message. It's not just that the miracles are happening. It's a message. So that's what happened to Moshe. That's why Moshe had to create the miracles and do the miracles, and reveal the miracles to Pharaoh to give the message to Pharaoh. He says, "Va'ata." Now we understand Yuvin Inin Hamayfs, the idea of the wonders. Shehera Hashem Yisparach Mitzrayim, that God wanted to show. It was a message to Egypt. V'yadu Mitzrayim. Mitzrayim needs to know, Ani Avaya, I'm God. What's it mean, Ani Avaya? They needed to know the level of godliness beyond creation. We know creation is from the name Elokim, the way God manifests within the laws of nature. He conceals himself in the laws of nature. So a person, one of the ways we reach Avos Hashem, love of Hashem, is by that as well, by his bindiness, by it's called Avos Olam. If a person properly paid attention to the happenings of the world and understood the happenings for what they are, really an act of God's kindness, Chesed, the world, the world was created with God's kindness. You see God's hand in creation. But Avaya is to show that this is the level beyond that God. God is not defined because He's a creator. There's godliness beyond creation. And that's what Hashem's message to Pharaoh was, to Egypt. V'yadu Mitzrayim kani Avaya. There's a level of Yud Kei Vav Kei that's beyond Elokim. Pirish v'yadu. What does it mean to know? Not just to know as in, okay, now I know. Milashon Shvira, to break their mindset. They will be made to know. You're breaking their concept, the way they see things. As explained before, in order, how does one take a spark out of a shell, right? You can't get it out without breaking the shell, especially the shell is covering, and a hard shell covering and protecting the fruit from all sides. A mechasela that's covering it, you must break the peel. Kimshal eggs, like the nut. When you break the klipa, then you allow for godliness to reconnect to the spark. The spark, as long as the spark is giving life and it's trapped in the klipa, it doesn't become functionless. It's still function. It's still a source of light and a source of life, and it gives life to negativity because the shell creates the agenda. When you break the shell, there's no longer the agenda of the shell. It allows the life to connect to its source, because all life is godliness. And that's the idea. Sus v'rachvay rama. What does it mean that the horse and the rider was thrown into the sea? The rider rides on the horse, taking advantage of the horse. It's riding and concealing the spark. These are the chariots of Pharaoh. By when you break them, they get thrown into the sea, not in a negative way, but in a positive way. The sea is the water is also the end point of the world of Atzilus. It's called Yam Shal Shlomo, the Sea of Solomon. The Sea of Solomon is what's covering. It's not just covering the horse. What it's concealing is the godliness that's behind the sea. What's deeper than the sea is the absolute godliness. So when you break the spark and you break the cover, so then the spark could go back into the sea to its source. Was a tourist, and this will answer. That Egypt will know that I'm God. Seemingly the Alter Rebbe or the Tzemach Tzedek asks an obvious question. Who's going to know? No one's alive. So if they're saying that Egypt has to know, but they have to know, they have to be alive, but no one's alive. They all were thrown into the sea. So the idea is not that they think that they were alive and they knew. They broke their mindset. El de Pir Shviyadu Lashon Shvir in the way of breaking. By Deze Hayagili or in Seif Hanitzutzin and the sparks of life that were in the Egyptians and in Egypt's culture and gave life to Egypt's culture goes back to its source. And it's connected to the source of life, of godliness, of Havai Yutke Vavke. That's just like the idea of the splitting of the Red Sea when the horse and wagons are thrown into the sea. To all the 10 plagues. The whole point was to break the mindset, the shell, the concealment of the shell, to take out the spark. The Jewish people didn't need the miracles. Because the Jewish people were, like I said, there's a difference between the soul that goes into the body and the spark that goes into the vessel. The soul that goes into the body is on a mission. The spark that goes into the vessel is trapped. And in order to take it out of its entrapment, you have to be on its level. And to be in its level means you have to be also in a level of entrapment. But the entrapment is part of a mission. It's like you're in the skies. So therefore they didn't need the miracle because there was nothing to break. They're on a mission. If they're on a mission, you don't have to break anything. The Jewish person's always connected to God. It's just the awareness was as if you're in the body, so you don't see things for what it is. You have to find godliness as part of your mission. A Jewish person is a believer, the son of a believer. Like it says, as soon as Moshe came and announced redemption, the Jewish people believed and they heard it's time for them that God remembered them. It's time for them to move on, to move out of Egypt. The job of Egypt is done. But the sparks that are trapped, and actually trapped, not as part of a mission, they're actually trapped in the klipa, in the shell. For that, you needed the 10 plagues to break and to get them out. That's what it means to break Egypt. Okay, so now he explained what is the idea of the plagues, and because the idea of the plague is to release the sparks, and most of the sparks were in Egypt. And how do you release it? By Vayadu Mitzrayim. Mitzrayim has to know that there's a level, means what's trapped, in order the ability that Mitzrayim could continue to siphon and live off the godliness. It traps it in, and it says, I don't want to know about God, about Havai Yudke Vavke. By knowing about Yudke Vavke, then it means it has to acknowledge, it has to have bittul. A relationship with Yudke Vavke means it's bittul, you don't exist, you see it's your source. But a person said, the Mitzrayim says, I don't want to know about Havai, right? Pharaoh says, Lo yadas Hashem, I don't know that. I don't want to know that. Not that I don't know because I wasn't informed. I'm not interested in knowing that. I would like to stay in my mindset and say that I do exist. I'm self-made person. So in order to break that, so you have to have the miracles that doesn't allow for that mindset to remain. So now we're back to the original question. So why is the first miracle the miracle of the snake? So he says, now we'll understand the first miracle is the miracle of the snake. What God was showing to Pharaoh. What happened there? That the stick turns into a snake. This is the beginning of all the 10 plagues. Meaning, like he said before, like we said before, the idea is to break the shell. What defines the shell? To be your own existence, to be a yesh. And the yesh says, and see, if you don't have within you a spark, so you can't be a yesh. What's a yesh? Yesh is I'm something, but you need to have a life force. So you so to say steal the spark, conceal it, don't let it be connected to the source, and it should be able to give life to negativity, to your own interest, to your own agenda. So he says, so you entrap the light and to say I'm something. Like it says, Li Oiri, I give my own light. Like we said before, but it realizes that the source of the spark comes from God. But now I'm owner of that spark. The spark, the point of the miracle was to say that yes, right now you're actually a source of evil. You're a force of evil because you trapped in the spark. But what gives you life? The ability for you to continue with your existence, with your agenda, is because you're taking off a life source of holiness. There is no existence outside of holiness. And that truth is, it's just a mindset. You are not really something separate from God, as if you imagine or would like to imagine, because it works for your interest not to have to be submitted to God. But the fact is, there is no life outside God. That the truth is, you are nullified to God. God allows for this entrapment for you to feel that as if you're not. But what Moshe was telling the Pharaoh was, it doesn't make a difference what you think. It doesn't change the fact. Your thinking and wanting to be disconnected from God doesn't change the fact that there is no life force outside of God. It's only the only reason you're able to imagine that you're disconnected is because God allowed for there to be this entrapment, that there's concealment. All the different levels that allow for the spark to fall into this entrapment, but it's only because God allowed it to be that way. And all these concealments and contractions became so strong, and concealments, that person couldn't think that they could say, I'm my own source of light. So when we reveal it, the source of the spark, how it's really way above all these concealments, automatically they become totally nullified. And that's why the first miracle was the snake, the sticks turning the snake. Mata hu lashon hamshach v'hataya. The staff represents the letter. The staff is like the letter vav or the letter langanun, the long nun, which means it's a line, and a line is like it starts on top and goes on bottom. It's the idea of hamshachat, it brings down. So the staff is what brings down. Like a shooting star shoots straight. The kol hamshachas, and what does that represent? Kol hamshachas, seidish stalshus zikdushim reish kol dagen atzeif kol dagen nikramata, and the entire life force of creation is an example of a staff that starts off in holiness and makes its way down towards this world. So the staff is showing how godliness comes down to this world. What's the snake? Betanin, the serpent. Himokra klipis Mitzrayim. That's the life. That's Mitzrayim's a klipa, shell, entrapment. Like it says in this week's Haftorah, the great sea monster that's in the river. So he looks at himself. Pari Melech Mitzrayim is the Tanim Hagadol, the great alligator, the great sea monster. He looks at himself as an existence. And so Moshe says, you're a snake, you think you're a snake, but your snake is really a staff. You come from godliness. So Moshe and Aaron showed him. How could there be a snake? Is because the staff allowed it to be so. It's only because the source of light, which is from holiness, that comes down like a staff, that is the reason why the snake exists, why the serpent exists, which is the makar klipas, which is the source of negativity. Like it says, the feet from which represents as, again, the line from above down. The feet goes into death, to give the impression that there could be a disconnect. What's death? Death means when you're disconnected from life. What does it mean to be alive and dead at the same time? When you're disconnected from your life source, which is godliness. If a person, why does it say that Rishoim Nikr Mason, that the wicked people are called dead? Not because they're physically dead. They're dead because they're dead from they're no longer connected, they're no longer aware of their connection of the godliness. So it says, Ragleha, the feet of the snake, of the staff, goes into the world. And nevertheless, God is the king over all creation. But because of all the contractions, That the staff gives off the impression that as if there is a snake, and the snake thinks that it exists. That the staff going down so low goes through such a process to allow for Pharaoh to think that he exists. And not only that he exists, that he's his own God. I give off my own light. So after that, Moshe showed him, where does the snake come from? It comes from the staff. And then he took the staff and brought it back to being the snake and brought it back to the staff to show that there's never disconnect. It means if the staff would just turn into the snake, so what would happen would be, okay, that my source comes from holiness, but now I exist. Moshe said, look, no, you're never really existing. Even when you turn to snake, I'll pick you up and you're really the staff. You're the same staff that you were originally. So therefore, afterwards, he shows how the snake goes back to being a staff. And how Aaron's staff swallows up all the other staffs to signify that's now a real existence. To show that even after you become a snake, you're going to go back to your original. You haven't changed. And the job really of a person in this world is to do that. The miracle of the staff is the job, is the avod of every person in this world. What's the avod of every person in this world? To reveal that every snake is a staff. And then to take this, not just to say where you come from. The person says, okay, so I come from a staff, I come from God. But now I'm a snake. So he says, no, the snake is going to turn back to a staff. Not only that, it's going to swallow up all the other snakes and all the other staffs. No more agenda. Everything is one. Everything is godliness. My job in this world, and the reason why my soul comes down in this world and it goes through the struggles of its own body and then to go out into the world and make a difference and make a change, is that miracle of the staff. And to take the staff and to take the snake and bring it back to the source of holiness. And that's what Moshe was showing Egypt and to Pharaoh. You're not your own existence. Pharaoh didn't. What Pharaoh wasn't fighting, that he was just fighting God. He was fighting the principle of God. He was fighting because God meant he doesn't exist. Not that he doesn't exist because that he's not his own person. He doesn't have his own agenda. Everything comes from Hashem. And if his life force was able, it would willingly be revealed. It would reveal within it willingly that it wants to be connected to God. It's so sucked into the snake that it thinks that that's what it wants to do, is to remain separate from God. And Moshe is showing him, no, you're not something with every second. Your whole existence comes from godliness. Even while you're in your situation of a snake, you're really a staff. God conceals himself. And as long as he's concealed, you're living with the impression that your agenda is the only agenda. And because God chose, therefore the snake is a snake, and when he wants to, the snake will turn back into the staff. As if the klipas never happened. And that's ultimately going to happen with Mashiach. What's the Rambam? Tonight's the Yortzeit of the Rambam. The Rambam says, M'amar the Rebbe, he finishes off, the Maimonides finishes off, M'amar the Rebbe, Hashem kamayim liyam chasim. What's going to be when Mashiach comes? It's not about anything different. Then the whole point is this interaction of Moshe and Pharaoh. That the V'yadu Mitzrayim, the world needs to know Kani Avaya, I'm God. And the whole world is going to know that Mashiach comes. There's going to be no existence that's going to see godliness or the experience of godliness from an outside. It's a process. There's going to be the process. There's going to be the judgment day. There's going to be all the things that the Gemara tells us about. But ultimately, what's going to happen is everything's going to go back to seeing the existence the way it is. And that's process started Moshe Rabbeinu's interaction with Pharaoh. And that was the idea of all the miracles. The point is that Egypt needs to know Kani Avaya, I'm God. All right, everyone. Thank you for joining. And those
Rabbi,
who are on YouTube, yes.
I just have a quick question. When I was reading the Parsha, and I probably read this before, Moshe Rabbeinu had sons, but why didn't they have any part in the temple or anything like that?
It wasn't meant to be. Moshe was going to have a dynasty, so to say, like Aaron, but they say that when he refused to take the job right away, and God got disappointed, let's say. So Rashi says, "Where's the Rashi quotes? Where was the consequence? The consequence was that he didn't become a priest. He stayed a Levite, and therefore the priesthood went on to Aaron and his descendants. That Moshe Rabbeinu, as great as he was, he didn't pass on his leadership to his son. It went to his student, which was Joshua.
Okay, I just wondered about that. Right, thank you.
No problem. Laila Tov, everyone. Thank you for joining.
Later,